The world is always full of the sound of waves. The little fishies, abandoning themselves to the waves, dance and sing and play. But who knows the heart of the sea, 100 feet down? Who knows the depth?
What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Sports Medicine Broadcast, a podcast to promote and improve your practice as an athletic trainer. I am Jeremy Jackson, host of the Sports Medicine Broadcast. This one will be sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/leadership. John Seco is closing out another athletic trainer leadership series. And this time we've got a listener success story in Rick Cox. Rick is the athletic trainer at Suffolk, I should have asked. But, I'm glad I didn't. I always mess it up when I ask how to pronounce something. At Suffolk University for 12 years. He's been in the profession as an athletic trainer, so he's the head athletic trainer there. We were just discussing some of the struggles with COVID and how they're running that and some of the leadership issues that are going on between Rick's school and it's a fun conversation and one of the things that we mentioned right before was everything we talked about last week. We had a collision in practical application. So Rick, welcome to the Sports Medicine Broadcast.
Thanks so much, guys, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yep. And so we met Rick in person live at NATA in Las Vegas. And then funny story. So Rick and I was trying to do something live on Twitter, and then Rick, he joined it, but then I somehow blocked him because I was trying to respond or something like that. And then so for probably a month, Rick was blocked from my Twitter. So he finally messaged me on Facebook or email saying, "Hey, I'm still blocked. Sorry, man. Sorry." So we did some conflict resolution there, nice and easy. So, all right, John.
Everything's coming together.
Yeah.
John, you read from.
I was like, I don't know why I don't see Jeremy on Twitter anymore, and then I realized, oh, he probably didn't unblock me.
All right. So again, this is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/path to leadership because we're talking about Rick's path to leadership. And again, he was recently featured on the Athletic Training Chat podcast, again, discussing leadership. So check that one out if you haven't, after you listen to this one. So John, you opened us up with a line from Musashi. Why Musashi? Why that line?
It's the book is covered a lot, and it's another one of those 1,000-page summer reads for me. It was a pretty. If you ever see the book, it looks almost like a Bible. It is so thick, and it's those less than paper thin pages, and it reads very, very well. It's a fun story to read, but it's also a very long story. It's about a samurai warrior's life and the path that they choose to go from a servant all the way to samurai in Japan in the 1600s. It's a fantastic book, a lot of layers into it, and that's part of the reason why I chose it. That line that I read was actually the closing stanza of the book. So you read over 1,000 pages and you get to that last line and you try to think about, why did you just read this whole book about the path of this samurai? And while we talk about leadership, we always talk about the paths of leadership too. So, the reason I chose Musashi is it really illustrates the person's path to their given occupation. We talked about the 1,000-hour rule a couple weeks ago. And a lot of times what we end up seeing is that outside of that person. But what we really never get to see is the true path that they took to see who exactly they are. And more importantly, not just the path that they've taken, but where it's going to take them in the future. And I think, the best part about that is it brings us back to Rick. We got a chance to meet Rick a couple years ago at NATA. And for me, it was that it showed the importance of what we're doing here, because we had listeners. People were listening. They were attaching themselves to what we had talked about and using the things that we were talking about in their own practice, not just in their athletic training practice, but in their personal life too. So, Rick was on the Athletic Training Chat about his lessons that he's learned, the books that he's read, those things. And I thought it was perfect to kind of bring Rick back into this fold and talk about how he got to where he is now and what's the future for Rick, and what he's learned out of our podcast series over the last couple of years. So, Rick, thanks for joining us, and I appreciate to hear your story.
Well, thanks again for having me on. I'm a big fan of the podcast, especially all the previous leadership series you've done. The first one, and then last year with Stanley McChrystal. I've taken so much from just hearing you guys who are great leaders yourselves talk about and discuss these principles and these books. And so for me, this is my year 3 as a head athletic trainer at Suffolk. Every other position I've had has been in an assistant role, generally with the strength and conditioning attached to it. And I thought for a long time, I thought that was going to be enough for me. Like I would just be part of a staff doing a really good job, taking care of my athletes, making people fast and strong and injury free. And so leadership wasn't for a big chunk of my career. It wasn't really something that I really studied. It was just sort of something I knew about, and I knew it was important, but it wasn't really that important to me. And then I saw early in my career some examples of some not so great leadership. And then once I finally realized that being part of a staff wasn't going to be good enough, I knew that I had to become a better leader. In order to, because I wanted to do a great job, and in order to do a great job as a head athletic trainer, you have to be a good leader. And it was going to be my first time being in charge of a staff. It was maybe my first time being in a supervisory role over people. So that was when I really sort of dialed in on what leaders do. I need to find good leaders, and I need to emulate them. And then once I realized, I decided that was going to be what I wanted, I just kind of dove right in, and I just kind of started consuming everything that I could. And then it was 3 years ago that I got this job. It was probably a year or two prior to that I really realized that this is where I wanted to be. So I started kind of looking at jobs, applying for jobs. And this one was nice because we came in, there was only one athletic trainer at Suffolk prior. He was by himself, and then they were increasing the size of the program, adding teams. So they knew that having one AT was not adequate. It was not adequate for the way the department was growing. So we increased the size of the athletic training staff. So I got hired, and then I helped hire the 2 other athletic trainers that ended up I work with today. And I'm still just continuing to try and grow and become better, because constantly I'm just always worried about, am I doing a good job? Am I a good leader? Do they trust me? Do they respect me? And from here, I think at this point, I just want to keep on moving up. My goal, I think, eventually is to be in an administrative role, a sort of a clinical and administrative role together. I want to be maybe assistant AD for sports medicine or something. And I just think I just have that drive to continually move up.
So you talked about the why, why you started doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, has it consumed you in a way that it can be almost unhealthy sometimes? There's been times where I've been consumed with that need to know how I'm doing, or am I doing the right thing? Or, last week we talked about, hopefully we're on the right side of history with some of the decisions that we're making, and it can consume you a little bit. When you started down your path, we're going to continuously say that phrase, down the path. Was this something that has gotten easier for you, or has it gotten a little bit more difficult for you?
Definitely gotten more difficult. I just feel like I think I'm doing something right, and then I haven't necessarily heard that I've done anything wrong, but I'm just the way that I'm constantly questioning it, and the more I'm trying, I don't know if I would say unhealthy, but I am like constantly questioning about, like, asking myself those questions, like, what could I have done better? Like, could I be doing things better overall? Could I be treating my coworkers better? So I don't think so. I don't think it's unhealthy, but I do constantly ask myself those questions.
There's a lot of self-reflection that happens with it, isn't there?
Yes, yes, and I think you have to. I think if you don't, then you're you're going to get stagnant, and if you're not trying to continually learn and be better, then I think that's where problems can arise.
So as our quote unquote one of our success stories, and that's one of the best parts about this series here is we've been able to have Patrick O'Haver on that's assisted us with the first couple episodes, and and then for us it was really getting a chance to meet you guys at NCA and really showing how well it's being taken, and just the fact that people are taking their own time, not necessarily because they have to do it for a CEU or anything, because they've seen the need for these principles to be enacted. A lot of us are that mid-level person as athletic trainers, whether you're a head athletic trainer at a college or at a high school, you're typically not the person in charge because there's the administration above you. For me, it was always a chance to lead up and to say, hey, these are the things that need to get done and be handled better. That was kind of what really prompted me to learn these lessons and enact them. But going back to it as one of our success stories, I want to hear about how you did it. How did you go back and we obviously talked about self-reflection, but how did you go about it yourself?
Sorry, go about what? I missed it.
Learning these lessons of leadership.
So a lot of reading of a lot of different individuals. I have certain people that I kind of tend to emulate, but I try not to get too hyper focused on one individual. But really, like that's what it is. It's been reading a lot of stuff in the military, just because at that point I think it's sort of the ultimate test of leadership when you're in a position where you're making decisions that could cause people to die. You're making decisions in the most chaotic environment you could possibly be in. But also, I mean, I like to take other different perspectives. And his perspective. I read a lot of Ryan Holiday, Obstacle is the Way, and that sort of that stoic philosophy. But I think that's really what it's been. It's about reading different perspectives. It's reading how people handled leadership decisions in certain situations, and I try to apply it. I'm not obviously in a lot of those situations myself, being an athletic trainer and not not in the military, but I think they're definitely applicable, and I think that's really the way I've done it, is mostly through reading.
I've talking with coaches, and there's a guy I know, really good friend of mine. He's out in Liverpool. He runs a soccer training facility, and he's always talked about how Liverpool accent, how football is life sped up. And it's always led me to think of how all athletics are life sped up. And that thought has been in the back of my mind for a long time. And then I read it in a book, another military book, because, very similar to me, I find a lot of those things applicable to our life and what we do in athletics. It's, war is life sped up. And, like I said last week, I always want to be delicate when I, talk about athletics and war. They're not the same thing. We can draw comparisons, but they're definitely not the same thing. It is lessons from those books because a lot of our life is so chaotic. And I think for me, when I started going down this path, it was a way to kind of control the chaos in my life, not just in my professional life, but also in my personal life too. How can I control these things and turn them in my advantage? And when I started reading more, it really helped me rein in the chaos that was in my life. Was that kind of something that you had recognized as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like you just realize that you're not alone. You know, other people have gone through similar situations or worse, and they've managed to handle it. And then I think I just take that as inspiration.
Yeah, for me, it was always trying to just wrangle that chaos, and we as athletic trainers find ourselves in those moments. And before we jumped on, Jeremy and I were talking about the medical timeouts and why we do those things. The reason why I implemented that at our school was, if you've ever been in a chaotic situation with an injury, you need to have everybody on the same page. And it was, a lot of it came from those lessons that we learned in the books that we've covered, and books that I've covered on the outside. One of the things that I've always found interesting about when we do start learning more about leadership, we start realizing that leadership lessons are everywhere, not just the books that we're reading. You even see them in movies like The Lion King, a children's story. Last year we read a children's story, and the lessons we can learn from a book that's geared towards 4-year-olds that we can take as professionals, as adults. Has that been similar for you? And outside of the books that you typically read, have you recognized some of the leadership lessons in the outside world?
Well, yeah, I think too, because there's sort of these sort of universal truths when it comes to leadership, and they apply everywhere. And it's not just in the military, it's not just in business, but I don't have a specific example now, but I see them. I see them everywhere, and then you can use them, and you can recognize whether that it was a good decision or it was a poor decision based on your experience and knowledge with leadership from other sources. But I think that's one of the really cool things is like even certain, we're looking at the election. I can make decisions on whether I think good leadership decisions were made or bad leadership decisions were made. And it's just relevant basically to every aspect of life, even the most minute details of your life. These are all decisions that you have to make, and they're either good or they're bad, or they can be indifferent, I suppose. But the big decisions that you're making, no matter the setting that you're in, no matter the job that you have, leadership it falls on everything. So it's one of those things, like once you what is it? What the quote is? Once you know the path, you see it in all things. I believe it's something similar to that, where it's just everywhere, and it helps guide you.
So going back to the medical timeout kind of thing. So last week was the first week that I did that, and I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago it was the last week that I did it, and it was just me, the other athletic trainer from my school, and the ambulance driver. And so we couldn't get all the people coordinated. So then this week I was more intentional about saying, hey, can we get the stadium athletic trainer? Can we get the head official? Can we get the police officer? Well, we still didn't get police officer. We still didn't get the athletic director there. We had, and I asked, why are we doing this? What's this about? Because I went in there into the officials' locker room and said, hey, who would I talk to about the medical timeout? And they're like, oh yeah, if there's somebody injured, we just call a timeout on the field. You guys come on. I'm like, that's not really what I'm talking about. This is just to make sure we're all on the same page. And so John and I talked, and you're nervous about taking that step of leadership, saying this is something different, this is something new, and I don't have experience with this, right? So talk a little bit about taking that first step and about some of the nervousness that you experienced and some of and how that came out for you.
Being a head AT, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, as we started out on the path or journey to leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely nervous. I had never really been in a supervisory role before. I had never advised staff before, and I knew I was going to make a lot of mistakes, but I felt like I could mitigate the mistakes by making little ones rather than making one big one. And each time that I would, every decision I made, I would again go back and reflect on it and try and decide, was it the right one? What could I have done better? And I still, I'm not going to say I don't make mistakes, 'cause I still do. I think I will for the rest of my life, probably. But I think it has gotten a little bit easier. I don't know how many years it's going to take for me to feel totally comfortable being in the position I'm in. But I'm definitely more comfortable than I was 2 years ago, where I kind of walked into this situation and I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And then I get so many experiences, every single year on how on the mistakes I made, on the decisions I've made, and I think each year it kind of gets a little easier. But I'm sure and then obviously, like, we throw COVID into the mix, and nobody knows anything about it, and everyone's making decisions and making mistakes, and so I think after this it might be a little bit easier, because not much is going to be thrown at us that's quite so daunting and unknown.
So have you had experiences to where you rejected the leadership, to where you said, okay, I failed at this once, maybe I failed at this twice, I'm not going to do it? So, going with my example of the medical timeout, like, it was a disaster, well, forget it, I'm going to trash this. Have you had some experiences like that?
I mean, I think we've probably done. I'm trying to think of any specific examples that apply just like yours, but I can't think of anything that's one really hard one that I've been like, that totally was terrible decision. It's just sort of, I think it's more sort of, I've tried to make everything better, like with our EAPs. Luckily so far we haven't really had an incident where we've had an EAP, and call an ambulance to the field or anything. But one of the first things I did was I looked at those, and then I tried to implement those. And our coaches weren't always up on the EAPs, and that's not a good thing. And we try to constantly kind of talk as a staff on how we can better communicate our EAP to our coach. One thing we haven't done a great job of. We haven't done really any practicing of it. We haven't really, outside of discussing it with the coaches, I don't think we've done enough to really make sure that if something were to happen, we have it totally dialed in. So I think that's probably one thing that I definitely think we need to improve on. We need to be better about practicing our EAPs and truly making sure everyone knows their roles in those situations.
I love that comment in there. And John, you can take over in just a second, but making the small changes. So unless there is a complete coaching staff change, making any sort of sweep is probably going to be really difficult. But if you slowly turn the water up, then the frog doesn't jump out of the pot, right? Right. It's the easy. If you just small changes, okay, just a little bit this time, right? And then over time, there's more acceptance, and over time you have more success. And then you're saying you're just building upon success upon success and learning from those lessons. So, John?
Mm-hmm. I just want to say, I think we need to be careful when we talk about disasters, right? Jeremy, you identified that as a disaster. But what did you learn from it?
I didn't really feel like it was a disaster. I was just giving an example.
Yeah. And there's been times where I've said that word too. I've said, oh, that was handled. That was a disaster of how it was handled. But at the end of the day, we ended up learning from it too. So, we make mistakes, and sometimes we want to identify the situation as a mistake. But if you look back on it and redefine it as a learning lesson, as a learning opportunity, or a lesson that learned that has made you better, it allows you to look at situations a little bit easier, so that it's not a negative thing. And I think early in my career, every situation was a negative situation for me because it didn't go exactly how I wanted to go. Rick, you talked about universal truths. What are the universal truths that you have found to be truths?
Really, it's about, I guess, taking responsibility for everything in your world as a leader. I mean, I think that is a universal truth. And then, you can't not placing blame. I think that's a universal truth as well. I mean, as soon as you start pointing fingers, I think it just doesn't look good on you, and everybody who knows that you're the leader knows that what you're doing. So I think pretty much honesty and being able to have hard decisions, hard conversations with people is really, really important. But I think that probably the number one is that you need to not point blame. You need to take blame and give out credit. That's really something that I think is really important. And if the opposite is true, if you try and take credit that's not yours and you place blame that is yours, everybody sees that. It doesn't. You might think that you're getting away with it, but everybody really sees it. And I think that's probably the biggest one is you need to, let your staff know when they've done something really well. And if something goes wrong, you need to be the one to look back and say, what did I do that caused that to happen? Because in actuality, that is absolutely the case.
Yeah, I think that's when people start recognizing that, that's when they start gravitating to you as a leader. They appreciate the honesty. They appreciate the candor. They appreciate your ability to be humble and to take whatever lessons were learned and to turn them into positives. The more you're able to do that, the more people gravitate to you. Has that been something that you've noticed during your time?
I definitely think so. I definitely think, because I think one of my biggest strengths is my ability to create relationships, and especially with not just my staff, but with our student athletes. I think we've created an environment where people know that we're going to be honest with them, we're going to be upfront, but we're also going to take really good care of them. And it's become a place where I've had people come to me for advice. The rest of the athletic training staff, people come to us for advice because they know how it is, and they know that we're able to use our experiences, and we'll set them straight as best we can. But they know that we're not getting things. And I have no problem if someone comes to me and be like, well, I did this and I think it's a bad idea. I'll just straight up tell them you handled this poorly. But at the same time, it's not about berating them. It's about how can you have done it better the next time. And some people have a hard time taking even that little bit of criticism. But I think as far as I think people have recognized that that's what we do, that we are straightforward. We do the best job we can, and we're not gonna blow smoke for people.
So can you talk about some of the times that you've been forced into relearning these lessons? We talk a lot about honesty, being humble, the great communication skills, building relationships, and where you've tried it and you've done a really good job at it, but then there's been times where you may have failed, and that's forced you to learn more. Has there been any situations that you've experienced like that?
Yeah. So my first year, we had a situation where we every week we have an ortho clinic, like a lot of colleges, and we had a baseball player who was in our ortho clinic being seen for something, and our doctor decided that she wanted him to go to the emergency room. And it was a situation where I was in the weight room working with basketball because I do strength and conditioning too. My coworker was in the clinic, but he had a volleyball game that night. And basically, we did not handle the situation well at all. We sent the kid to the ER. He was a freshman. He went with a sophomore, went to the ER with him. And neither of us just recognized that we needed to tell our baseball coach that we were sending one of his kids to the ER. I don't know if it was because it's just we had too much stuff going on. We both thought the other one was going to do it. But it wasn't on my radar, which is not a great thing. And nothing bad happened. He went to the ER. They did the test they wanted to do, and he ended up being fine. But the following call from the baseball coach, and he basically lit me up because nobody had called him to tell him that one of his players had gone to the ER. And so I think if I was younger in my career, and things I have done in the past is I would have immediately started making excuses as to why that happened. I was in the weight room. I wasn't there. Nick was with him. Like, what am I supposed to do? I've got other responsibilities. And I've definitely done that where coaches come at me and I've panicked and tried to start making excuses. But this time he just, as he was yelling at me, all I could think of was he's right. we screwed this up big time. And so that's what I said. I said we made a mistake. And it was kind of like, I don't know if he was taken aback, or if he was expecting something different. But when I said, you're right, we made a mistake and we're not going to let this happen again. And that kind of de-escalated the whole thing. And I apologized, and we kind of had a good conversation after that. But that was definitely a scenario where if I hadn't read some of the things I've read, and I hadn't decided I wanted to be better than I have been in the past, I think I might have tried to do the same thing, is make a bunch of excuses and make it seem like it wasn't my fault.
You may have already answered the question here, but have there been any relationships that you've seen improve over your time because of your improvement in your communication styles and being honest and humble with your coaching staff? Have you seen relationships go from, I hate talking to that coach because he's an asshole, to we're pretty good friends and on really good terms because of the way we communicate?
I don't think I have gone that yet. I'm working on that. There are certain coaches that I'm dealing with that we're in the front end of that right now, and I'm trying to improve. But I think overall I've been really lucky in that I've had coaches, and I've had great relationships with most of my coaches, especially in the last, here at Suffolk. I'm constantly trying to improve. I know that I could be a better communicator. Like, there are certain coaches that I don't have, not a bad relationship with, but not a great relationship. And I think I can improve that by taking the initiative and trying to communicate with them more. But there's a coach I can think of that we're not on the greatest of terms all the time. And I know that I need to try and fix that.
Yeah, luckily our coach there was a coach I struggled with for years, and the communication just wasn't there. And luckily it wasn't just me. He struggled with our administration. Our administration struggled with him. He was very closed off. He had built these walls around his program, and I busted my ass for a whole year to make a better relationship with this person, to the point where eventually I was invited to the year-end banquet, which, it's not a big deal to me, but the class of girls that had graduated, I became a little bit closer with them. I was happy to be there at the year-end banquet, and then after that, the year was over, and then it just went right back to the starting point. And then it was back to ground zero. Couldn't communicate with the guy, couldn't really get anything out of him. We weren't working in concert, and luckily for me, it worked itself out where he just resigned his position and moved along. Now it doesn't mean that that's gone away. The next coach that comes in, we may have difficulty talking and building that relationship, whatever it is, but it was definitely a lesson learned that it is not something that as soon as it gets good, it's fine. You have to continuously work at it over and over and over and over, because you have to continuously foster and cultivate that relationship. It's like building a garden. You want to build a good, hardy garden. You have to take care of it, and you have to treat it.
Well, it's tough too, because sometimes, the other person doesn't really have an interest in having a good relationship, and that's probably why the relationship's not great in the first place. But if they don't see the value in having a good relationship with you, you can do all the work in the world. And if they're just so resistant, I mean, there's not a lot that you can do. I think that's great that you were able to, even for a short while, improve it. But you're absolutely right. Like, it can't ever stop, especially with someone who it's not naturally have a good relationship with other people.
So leadership is not just a lesson, or the lessons of leadership are your professional life. For me, it helped me gain a better understanding and really take a hold of my professional life and start leading in the areas that I needed to in my building. At my state level, I started to really just kind of take control and really start pushing forward the profession, in my opinion. It really helped me. but then on the other side, I started noticing that it was helping my personal life too. I was able to take control over relationships with friends, and maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I didn't like control my friends, but I became closer friends with the people I was around. I communicated better with them. I communicated better with my parents, and I just started noticing things were getting better too. Has that been the case?
That's an area that I'm still trying to get better at. 'Cause I think I've been so hyper focused on improving my professional leadership, and I really, to my detriment, have not, unfortunately, found that to be quite the something I've really tried to be able to transition my leadership knowledge from my professional to my personal life as well as I would have liked. I do want that to be the case, and so I am trying to kind of take a step back and reflect on how I can apply these to my personal life. But I know that it's important, and it's an area of an improvement for me for sure.
Jeremy, what about you? Have you noticed some of these lessons kind of take a positive effect on your personal life?
Without a doubt. Honestly, if you go back and listen to the leadership series, you'll hear kind of about the journey. And even just recently, we talked about just slowing down and listening. So the other night with one of my sons, I was upset, and I was like, he said, "They're ticking me off." And I said, "Son, nobody can tick you off. Your brothers can do things that you allow you to get upset, but they cannot control you. They cannot control your emotions. So can you explain to me, because they're ticking me off, your brothers can't control your emotions. Can you explain to me why?" Right? And so before it's like, no, they're not, or, well, go do something about it, that kind of thing. But it's a matter of taking like, let's have this conversation. Let's bring the level down, his level, so I'm not standing over him, making him, adding to the situation. So kind of diffusing the situation. And then the last probably week, and I'm going to fail at this more times than not, but the last week, I've done the dishes pretty much every day that I was home for dinner, right? And so it's easy for me to say, you guys are here most of the day, you take care of the dishes. But instead, I say, okay, Sarah, you go get things ready for bed or to put MJ to bed, and that's the baby. So, and then, number one, you help me clear the table. Number two, you sweep the floor. Number three, you're going to load the dishwasher, right? And so then I'm there helping wash the dishes, clear the counter, load the dishwasher, and get things ready so that we have a fresh start in the morning, because I have to set that example. I have to be willing to sacrifice my comfort or I deserve to come home to a clean counter. Well, I deserve to help and to lead my family. And then there's so many other times where these things that we've gone over, talked about, that I have to learn again, like you just asked Rick, like, oh yeah, we talked about that. And then next year, whenever we do this leadership series, which I think we're going to focus on Hamilton, I think I've already decided that, because we were talking about that with Patrick. But so I'm sure we'll talk about some of the exact same things, but it'll be just a different application. And again, as the kids grow, or as the situations here at school change, with my leadership at school, with my position in leading the sports medicine department here, it's going to continue to change and evolve, and I'm going to have to learn them over and over again. But without a doubt, there's been a change at the house. And, I was talking with somebody the other day, and they said their marriage was struggling, right? And they're like, honestly, I don't know what to do. I'll go outside and I'll just punch the ground, because I'll just lay back and take some breaths. And so that night I said, hey, Sarah, 0 to 10, 10 is like amazing. Where do you feel like we are kind of right now in our marriage? And she's like, it's probably like an 8 or a 9. And so it's one of those regular check-in things. And here at work with Sophia, I'll say, hey, how do you feel like you're doing? How do you feel like we're doing with communicating? Is there something, you need? Is there anything that doesn't look right or feels off? So maybe if it's the scheduling, like she feels like she has to work more or work, is not working enough, or, a skill that she needs to work on, something like that. So it's just a regular check-in. And so it's part of the leader or mentor process that I've learned as well. So.
Oh, last couple questions, Rick. I think we've talked about, we've seen this path that you've taken, and I wrote down in the show notes. I kind of just went with the who, what, when, where, and why with it. And one of them was, as I read through them last night, I kind of laughed because I was like, this is a kind of a dumb question, but I still think it's a good question because I still want to know what's been the outcome for you from going through this path, and then what does the future hold for you?
Excuse me. I would say it's the outcome has been that I've become so much more confident, not only as a leader, but as a clinician, because I've just been able to learn to really take control of what I'm doing clinically. And I've become a better communicator with my athletes for sure. And it's definitely made me happier. And not that I was ever unhappy with any of my other jobs for the most part, but it's a role that I've realized that I've wanted to take on responsibilities, and I've been able to do it. So I think that's the confidence is probably the biggest part for me, that I've become a better communicator at work, and I've become a better clinician just because I've learned how to talk to people better, and how to, and again, it's something that I continually need to continue to improve upon, but I've become so much better than I have been in the past. And I think that's my biggest takeaway, is my confidence level, both as a leader and as a clinician, have both improved.
Yeah, that's great. Over the time, you've learned a lot. And one of the things that I've always struggled with was almost this lost time of, I was the one that placed blame on anybody else. I was the one that, you should know who I am, rather than me educating people. Any other type of negative thing you can think of that we typically see with athletic trainers, that was me. I was, brash, and I couldn't communicate. I was, I even remember in this, I hate this, that this is one of my memories, but it's like my second year out, I was like, why is he questioning me? I'm the one with the master's degree. Like, that line that I just said that was just so full of ego is still there, that I think about it, that it still bothers me that I said that at one point, because now that's not me. I always think about this. There's a lot of things that I've learned over the last couple of years that I take so much pride in. But what would I go back and tell my young self? What are the things that that young person needs to know? And have you ever thought about that, Rick? Is that something that you think about? And what are one or two things that you would tell a young Rick Cox, a 22-year-old Rick?
Well, I'd say that you hit it on the head with the humility piece, because I can tell you I've been in that same situation where, rather than talking to a coach and explaining and educating, it was straight up, you're not a medical professional and I am. So that would, I think that's one thing that I've learned that I would prefer to have learned earlier. And also, I think that I would have probably tell myself, start learning about this stuff way sooner than you have, because like I said, I think it's made me better overall as an athletic trainer. And I think that if I could have started this when I was much younger, although I think at the same time, I might not have gotten the same lessons if I had forced myself to read certain things when I was in my early 20s versus in my early 30s. But yeah, I think that's part of what it was you don't know everything. You have a lot to learn, and you need to be humble.
So in just a second, I'm going to ask you for book recommendations, some of the things that you would point people towards. I just downloaded Frederick Douglass. I think it's called A Slave's Story or something like that. So I'm going to listen to that on audio book while I'm running, because that's probably one of the better ways for me. I can just run through the neighborhood and check that out. But Patrick O'Haver said we got to find some shorter books, John, so that he can participate, because these 1,000-page books aren't going to cut it. Joel, like I mentioned at the beginning, he said thanks for shout out to his podcast and his episode with Rick. And then Todd was reading again just about how the emotions are your responsibility, not somebody else's fault. And then I commented again, like, I didn't learn this until I was a full-grown man, and I'm still processing it. So I can't expect my 10, 8, and 6-year-old children to know that or to fully understand that as well. But I can begin teaching that, and I can begin demonstrating that as their father, as their leader, as the leader of the household, that nobody can make you angry. But if I do it from a place of anger, a place of frustration, then it's not going to work. So I need to be able to diffuse the situation. I needed to detach, like one of the other podcasters and authors we like to talk about and read in leadership talks about all the time. So just detach, step back, slow down, lower your tone, and just remember what's going on. What do you need? What do you need right now? What do you need at this moment? So, and then John McGregor, he's with, is it Seattle? Is that where he is, John?
Ooh, Portland. He's
Portland.
a Timbers guy. Yeah.
Okay.
John,
Yeah.
Portland. Yeah.
So he's been checking in quite a bit, watching some of the live stream there, and then Gene Hall as well watching live. So appreciate everybody that has been watching live in and out and comments. So on the live stream, we get comments and the impact and just the difference it's making there.
So are you telling me this is a bad time to recommend the Gulag Archipelago, which is another 1,000-page book for Patrick to read?
All right, Patrick, you got your assignment.
Jeremy, did you finish About Face yet, or what?
Oh yeah, that was like a one-day read for me, right? No. But I might try because again, I was listening to Jocko first time. Weren't allowed to say more than 2 times. So
Three times
was the max
throughout
the whole podcast. So that was one. And I thought about just starting off the story or the whole podcast doing that, just saying that name 3 times and screwing everybody up. Just again reading from About Face and talking about that book, and so I do need to pick it up and just go through it and read it, and then maybe go back and look at all the lessons as I do. But so again, we're talking about Face.
Yeah. So Jeremy did mention that I did put a limit to the amount of times we're allowed to say the word Jocko on the show today. So that's twice. So we have 1 left. But part of the reason is all 3 of us have gone through and we've read all the books. We've attached ourselves to that, and you have to be careful with ideologies, right? That there's a lot of lessons to be learned, but we also don't want to just fall deep down into the hole of ownership and only refer back to those books and only think about how would he do things and how would his company do things. And that's why we've had to expand our lessons from these books and to gather lessons about leadership from other different sources. So for me, I may be a bigger Stanley McChrystal guy, and Rick talks about Ryan Holiday and Simon Sinek, and Jeremy, he's had other books that he's talked about too. But it's good that we're able to pull from other different areas to kind of gather all these lessons about leadership so that we're able to use those in our daily practice as athletic trainers. Rick, so what are some of the books that you have found that have helped you along the way?
Yeah. So obviously, Extreme Ownership is really like the baseline. No, that doesn't count. But that's sort of like the baseline. And I think probably early on I read it and I was like, this is it. And then it took, and then I started expanding, like you said. But I think that those principles in that book are really what I kind of refer back to as my baseline. But I really also enjoy Ryan Holiday, and that's a book for Patrick. If you want shorter books, The Obstacle is the Way and The Ego is the Enemy. You can read those. You can read those in a day. They're small books. They're not that long. But there's a lot, and the nice thing is he takes a lot of. He's a Stoic. He's a practitioner of Stoic philosophy, but it's not a book about Stoicism. It's a collection of stories of people who have undergone adversity and they've used Stoic principles to improve their situations. And then for me, Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. I was just reading some of that last night. And I really like that one. He talks about this circle of safety and how people need to, when they're at work, they need to feel safe that they are able to, they can have an opinion. They can discuss that opinion with the people above and below them, and they're not going to get ridiculed, and there's not going to be negative consequences for them to be expressing that opinion. So I think that's something I've really tried to take to heart. Is like, I'm not this technically the leader of the athletic training staff at Suffolk. I 100% want my coworkers to have input on everything. And I don't ever want to say, well, no, I'm the head AT. My decision is final. I don't ever want to be like that. And so that's something that I've from Simon Sinek and he's got Leaders Eat Last, and he's got Start With Why. And those are some of the lessons. So while that one book is sort of my baseline, I've learned so much from so many other sources.
Jeremy, I don't think I've ever asked you the question. Are there any other books that you've experienced or read through or listened to that have helped shape your lessons?
Well, the Bible would obviously be an important one for me as a Christian. That should shape everything I do at my house. It should also shape everything that I do in the way that I treat others. With kindness, with love, with understanding, being slow to speak, slow to become angry, and quick to listen. Those biblical principles should lead me, and they definitely shape the way that I do everything. So the Bible will be number one there. I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey, and he has a book called EntreLeadership. Also, Total Money Makeover. And again, I talked about on several of the podcasts where we talk about budgeting, and just the fact that if you can get your financial house in order, then a lot of other things will fall in order too. So as John is talking about getting married, now having a stepson, is that right? And then, moving houses and things like that. So if you have your financial house in order, it reduces the stress and allows you to approach everything and at a better angle, at a different level. So I'd say those are probably the two biggest ones right there.
Cool. Rick, is there anything that you want to add before we close things out?
I think so. This has been really great, and I've had fun talking. It just makes me realize how much more I have to learn.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you're going to constantly come back to is, hey, I've got this figured out. No, I don't. There's still a lot more to learn, and there's still a lot more to practice.
All right, so if you want to block Rick on Twitter like I did, it's SUFFOLK_AT, so Suffolk AT or Suffolk _AT, or you can email him. I'll have the email in the show notes. It'll be easier that way, but it's rcox2@suffolk.edu. So if you want to get a hold of Rick, you'll find out that way. And like I always say, if you're on social media, you can find either me or John, and then like the close connections, or it'll recommend also follow this person, that kind of thing. So we've obviously recently, as of releasing this today or recording this today on 10/28, 2020, we will have been like 5 or 10 different tweets or Facebook posts or Instagram posts or whatever about how we've interacting, talking leading up to this. So easy way to get a hold of us there. John Seco, always popular on Twitter, always got something good, fun, funny to say, and I would say a king of the Office memes. So huge fan of The Office. So if you got Office interactions, then hit up John Seco, which is just his name, John Seco, on social media, or on Twitter, and then on Instagram, something different. Me is pretty easy, Mr. Jeremy Jackson, or sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/about. And that'll have ways to get a hold of there. So whenever John's on here, we like to talk about some leadership coming from Myotech. John, what do you have from Myotech this week?
Yeah, they're. I do want to give a shout out to them. They did provide a large amount of N95s for athletic trainers, secondary school athletic trainers in the state of Michigan. I forgot to mention that last time we had met with our executive board with Mats, and that was one of the things that we talked about. I do want to give a shout out because Myotech is always out there as a group that is always advocating for athletic trainers. We're their number one clients, and they understand and respect what we do as a profession. And it just shows when they do things like that, like providing masks to secondary school athletic trainers. So if you get a chance, you're looking to do some bidding, Myotech for me is my number one choice. That's who I go through. My salesman Danny is quick with an email, and most of the times he's driving back out to see me and drop off whatever I've ordered. So I'm expecting some Gatorade to be dropped off here in the next day or so. So love Myotech.
All right. sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/path to leadership, featuring Rick Cox, of course, my friend John Seco, the Sports Medicine Broadcast. That is a wrap. All right. So,
Jocko.
so we were talking about